All right, so I'm here with Jay Vincent, and to say that I'm a fan would be kind of a understatement. I've been following him for a while, and I've been wanting to get him on a while ago, and I just think it didn't work out, whatever. And if you guys watch the channel, you guys know I've been covering a lot of hit people, and that's only because out of genuine interest. And I think it was something, of course, I heard about it when I was younger, and I mean, it was a couple of years ago. I tried the various experiments, jumping into it. Large part too from Jay. I think this might even be like the thumbnail. I don't know, but I think you made high intensity graded again. I think it was you who really I think really on the scene as far as YouTube and stuff like that, that I think really put it back in the forefront. I've had John Hart on and some other people, and John's obviously awesome. I think he's a huge reference point for me at least. But I think as far as raising the bar in popularity, but then also on your course, I bought your course a while back. It had to be maybe a year ago. I don't know what it was. The Golden Era course. We'll plug that, link that down below. I could say a lot about Jay, but I'm going to let him jump into it, and then I'll jump into the questions. I know a lot of people actually were waiting for this. Probably one of the most requested guests I've had in the show. Say to get Jay Vincent. I'm like, I will. I'll get him on there eventually. All right, so Jay, just introduce yourself to people, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, guys. Thanks for having me on, of course. I love the opportunity to talk high intensity training as much as I can. I do it for a living. So to get these principles and this approach out more, always a blessing. Um, so yeah, basically I started off doing this. My story's interesting. It differs from pretty much any story with high intensity training bodybuilders, instructors, you name it. Basically, I was about 22, 23 years old. And for one reason or another, I just wanted to become a fitness model. I was working an office job and I'm like, this sucks. And foolishly, 22 years old, I thought I was going to be some, big shot model and it would get me out of the office job, which here I am today. So it did. So I was about 191, 92 pounds at the time, 22 years old. I've been training consistently since I was 16. Um, so I get into this modeling agency called Silver Model Management in New York City. I guess it was kind of like the premier, bigger fitness modeling agencies. And the agent says, you got everything we need, but you got to add muscle. You got to get bigger. And I'm thinking at this point, I'm jacked. I'm like, get bigger. I'm about 6 feet tall, 192 pounds. I thought it looked great. He said I had to get bigger. So I'd been doing the traditional push, pull, legs, whatever, just bodybuilding routine at the time. And then I started digging deeper. I started digging into a little bit of the science. I started digging into some research. Eventually, I come across a guy named Dr. Doug McGuff. And I see this video where essentially he says, everyone's got it wrong. And he explains from a physiological perspective what you're supposed to be doing in the gym and why what people traditionally do isn't the best approach. So I see this video and I go, wow, that makes sense. I buy his book. I read his book about 100 times and I start applying these principles. And within about 4 months, I went from, about 190, 192 pounds to about 204, 205. I was saying about 3 months. And I'd been doing all the same stuff, except for cutting back the volume and increasing the intensity. Of course, I slowed down my reps a little bit, things like that. And then after that, people started asking me, what the heck have you been doing? How did you gain this much muscle this quickly? Of course, I booked some really good modeling gigs, with, Muscle Tech. This was in a magazine. That was in a magazine. Under Armour, things like that. People started asking me, so I started teaching it. And that's kind of where my instructor personal training journey began. And shortly after that, there's a guy in town who actually had, one of those traditional Ken Hutchins super slow MedX studios. And I went in there I wanted to try MedX equipment because I knew how rare it was. Turns out the guy was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. I believe, I can't remember how it's pronounced. bone cancer. And he was looking for someone to train his clients while he was getting stem cell treatment. So I began training in a high intensity training studio using the super slow approach, MedX equipment. And then shortly after that, well, not shortly, I would say about a year and a half after that, I ventured off, opened my own studio called BioFit up in New York, upstate New York, stocked with, old school Nautilus Nitro, stuff like that. And then later purchased his studio off of him. So here I am at about 27, 28 years old with 2 studios, and I'm fully engulfed in the high intensity training stuff. So I did that for about 7 years. I instructed high intensity training, and then COVID happened. And as you know, in New York, they just shut down gyms and training studios. And I decided to take a different approach. I moved down to Florida because I was kind of unhappy with New York at the time. And I just began doing YouTube videos, just talking at my iPhone the way I would talk to my clients, explaining things. And at the time, there seemed to be a demand for this. A lot of, I had been on a couple of podcasts. So basically, I just decided to transfer what I was doing from in person to online, teach these principles. And it kind of took off. People liked it. And kind of here I am today. And now basically what I do is I coach people with high intensity training in a personal coaching service program, and create social media content teaching these principles. And that's essentially what I do. Currently, I'm a part-time strength coach up at Florida State University as well for the men's basketball team. And that's where I am today, and where I'll be in the next 10 years. Who the heck knows? It's an interesting journey.
That's awesome. It's really kind of like just stuff had to really fall into place. I mean, because I think even the fact, it says a lot about you too, about, I'm actually looking at that Body by Science book here because I have that book, and the I forget his name, Ellington Darden,
Yep.
The New High Intensity Training. That's probably one of my favorite ones as far as.
Yeah, that is definitely my favorite high intensity training book. It's awesome.
Oh, really? You think that's your favorite one? Really? Okay, that's interesting. Because Body by Science, I think one of the very first time I saw that when I was younger, and I had to be in my early 20s, and I was like digesting books. Sounds like you too, when you were like getting into stuff. You want to read something. I don't think people do that as much anymore. But when I first saw that book, I think I first probably read a few lines of it. I'm like, what the hell is this? It was like something like 5-10 minutes. Because I think right away, my brain was conditioned. Like, okay, this is just, it's not going to work. Right. I know I went into it a little bit younger, but it was years ago when I even kind of applied it. But I think my brain would have just shut that off. And maybe to your point, people I think were, and no question, this maybe is a point I'll question into later, is that I was those people who was in the gym for 2 hours at a time. But I think a lot of it was my personality. I was going to get into that later. Maybe a personality type where I feel like a lot of the things I was going to start with this, a lot of things you hit on, I pretty much agree with everything, even though I wasn't like a high intensity advocate and really doing it. And I believe 100% of the stuff makes sense, especially on a scientific basis. But then also that part of like the psychology of just like, you want to do something, So not to go over the map here, but I think that really had to do something with you as far as when people first hear of high intensity training about what the principles are, it might shut people off. Like, well, this is just not going to work, and you discard it. So maybe just go into that a little bit as far as how would you describe high intensity training, and maybe how does your approach differ from other people out there?
So high intensity training, the way it should be defined is simply when you're doing an exercise, focusing on pushing the muscle group or the exercise to the highest level of intensity possible. So it's kind of the opposite of the traditional bodybuilding approach. Do as much exercise as you can possibly tolerate in a workout versus train as hard as you possibly can in a workout and adjust the amount to accommodate that. High intensity training simply focuses on the concept of intensity of effort. That's pretty much all it is. There's a bunch of different variations of applying that basic principle, but it really focuses on taking each exercise to the highest level of intensity you could possibly tolerate, i.e. muscle failure, or in some cases beyond, because it's based on the simple principle, the simple neurological principle of the size, Dr. Elwood Henneman's size principle. Motor units are recruited based on intensity of the contraction or effort. The harder you push, the harder you contract your muscles, the more motor units are excited by your nervous system, or in layman's terms, turned on. So say we have 100 muscle fibers. Obviously, if we want to experience the most growth possible, we want to stimulate as many of those muscle fibers as possible. Say, for the sake of simple numbers, I have 100 muscle fibers in my biceps, thousands, of course. If I want my biceps to get the biggest, I want to stimulate all those fibers to grow, or all those motor units to grow. Motor units are simply packets of muscle fibers innervated by a motor nerve. So the size principle says, the harder you contract, the harder you push, the more effort you put forth into your exercise, the more muscle fibers are going to be recruited and stimulated. This is something we've known since 1957. Dr. Elwood Henneman coined the size principle. So what most people are doing, they might be, you can stimulate muscle growth to some extent, by training your muscles with any level of intensity. But where people stop short, I think, is that instead of recruiting all 100 muscle fibers, they're probably recruiting somewhere in the ballpark of 50 to 60, 50 to 60% of the available motor units. But if you want to get those other 40% of the available motor units, so that extra growth you're missing out, you need to push extremely hard. So that's simply what high intensity training is. It's just simply training as hard as you can. The thing is, when you do this, you cannot tolerate as much exercise. People have been conditioned that you need to go to the gym every single day for a certain amount of time per day. And it goes against the grain, against those commonly accepted principles of exercise, which is what makes it very hard for people to grasp. But when you understand basic physiology and neurology of motor unit recruitment, it makes perfect sense. Some people, they define, and I've had a problem with this over the past few years, they think high intensity training is one set training, or they think it's slow rep training, or sometimes they call it time under tension training. This is all wrong, okay? Some people perform the reps very, very slow. This is called super slow. Some people perform the reps not slow at all. Dorian Yates, for instance, didn't perform reps slow at all. He just trained really, really hard. These are all just different ways to approach high intensity training. And another thing is, while most of the high intensity training community agrees that one set to failure is all that is required for stimulating optimal muscle growth, what I found through coaching and through my experience is it's not always the case. Some people may actually need more than one set. One set is the ideal approach for high intensity training. Once you learn how to train as hard as you can possibly train, we ideally want to get to one set, but high intensity training should not be categorized as one set to failure training, because quite honestly, the way I coach my clients, the way I trained people, I would try to get as much as I could out of them in one set. But if they didn't quite get where we needed them to go, well, yeah, we do an additional set, or we do a drop set. So to wrap all that up, high intensity training is not one set to failure training. It's not slow rep training. It's not time under load training. It is simply focusing on pushing each exercise as hard as you can. That's it.
I've had plenty of trainers put me through a workout that is definitely hard. I'm like, okay, this is grueling. I don't want to do this again. And I'm not going to say I'll kind of say it's easy, but it kind of is. It's like if someone has told you to do a million, just start rattling off stuff, kind of like CrossFit. Yeah. And you get burned out. And you're like, hey, that was freaking hard. And like, yeah, I'm done in 15 minutes, but I could get up and do some other squats if I wanted to. But like when your approach, which is, again, you're not telling them to go super slow. I think what you teach is the weight's adequate enough that when you're going on the concentric, it's moving slow, which makes sense. When I do those workouts, and that was like a separate point I'll get into too, like why I kind of would stop after a while. I was like, my days were probably my recovery. I'm like, for 6 days, I was just dead. I mean, I feel like I was hit by a truck. So much my wife's like, you gotta like stop what you're doing. Cause I was just like, I was felt like I ran over for like, but I was so when the session came, I was like, let's go. My body couldn't wait. I was like, I was ready to explode. So then again, there, but then like those last few though with heavy weight, point is that workout was very different than just having me do a bunch of randomized stuff that's very hard where I can get cashed out early. So how would you define if someone said, well, like I went to failure, I got like a 20-pound weight, I did a bunch of random stuff and I can't move it anymore versus something that's slow and controlled adequate weight or tension?
So just because something is hard on your body does not make it effective exercise. You can stand on one foot and juggle 5-pound dumbbells. That's very difficult, but it's not effective exercise. So
And also not failure either is what you're saying. Like you
right.
could get someone to like kind of failure, but it's not the same versus like a lightweight versus heavier.
The way you got the adequate stimulus for the most part is when you get done with an exercise and you say to yourself, I couldn't possibly do another set. Your muscles are significantly weakened from their original strength level. That's how you know you really got the set to the adequate stimulus that you're looking for. Because essentially what we're doing is we're recruiting muscle, fatiguing it, in weakening it. So momentary muscle failure is when your body momentarily cannot produce force. Now that happens when we recruit as many motor units as we're capable of, and we can no longer recruit any more for that particular exercise. Now you can do more sets, more exercises over and over and over again, but you're simply going to be retracing those motor units and just using them again. So when you're stimulating motor units to grow or stimulating, mechanotransduction or what's commonly referred to as mechanical tension in the exercise community now, as long as you recruit and contract those motor units intensely, they have been stimulated. Yes, you can use them over and over again, but you're not going to be able to re-stimulate them. The best analogy I use is like turning on a light. So when we recruit and stimulate the high threshold motor units, we're essentially turning on that signal. We're turning on that mechanotransduction stimulus. Basically, you have something called costamers on the outside of your muscle fibers, and they experience tension. After they experience tension, there's a huge biochemical response that happens in the muscle fiber itself that turns on something called the mTOR pathway, or the mammalian target of rapamycin, which then signals through gene transcription to grow more contractile elements. Once we've turned on the mTOR pathway, you cannot turn it on again. So just because something is hard with your body doesn't mean you've turned on the mTOR pathway in those high threshold motor units. So the real goal of training to muscle failure is, first of all, you're going to recruit more motor units compared to if you hadn't. Second, it ends up being more efficient. You could get all 100 motor units with multiple sets, but it's not necessary. It's kind of like if I were to walk to my mailbox to get the mail, I could take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Eventually I'll get there, but it's much more efficient to just go right there, right?
Yeah.
So training to failure becomes much more efficient. Also, we want to get at fast twitch, high threshold motor units. These are the glycolytic motor units that are most susceptible to growth, but they are the hardest to recruit because your body only recruits fast twitch, high threshold motor units when your muscles need to produce a lot of force. So if you're not taking sets to that extreme intense muscular contraction, your body has no reason to excite those motor units, and those are the ones that grow. Fast twitch motor units are the ones most susceptible to muscle growth. So I think a lot of people get confused that just because something is hard with their body that it's effective exercise. Sure, it's effective to some degree, but it isn't optimally effective for muscle growth because you have to look at how motor units are recruited and how they're stimulated. There's lots of things that people do in the gym: sled pushing, box jumps, the Turkish get up. They may be demanding on your body, but our goal is not to simply find activities which are generally difficult for our body. Exercise is a very specific activity. The purpose of exercise is to stimulate an adaptive response in all the major muscle groups. So what you do is you choose specific exercises that place resistance against the primary function of those identified muscle groups in order to stimulate an adaptive response, aka muscle strength and growth in those specific muscle groups. And then you want to choose exercises that are safe and efficient. So that's really what exercise is. People often confuse exercise with recreation. They confuse exercise with, sports. But exercise is really a very specific activity with a very specific goal of stimulating an adaptive response. And the adaptive response is an improvement in muscle strength. People are under the impression that there's a dichotomy between training for strength, training for muscle size, training for cardiovascular efficiency, training for metabolic improvements. It's all the same. The way, I believe Ellington Darden or Ken Hutchins says, your muscle is the window to improving all aspects of your physical capacity: cardiovascular, metabolic, strength, bone and connective tissue, muscle size. The muscle size component is merely a side effect of improving a muscle strength. Your body does not care how big its muscles are. When we stimulate a muscle to grow stronger, the additional contractile proteins or contractile filaments that your body adds to allow the muscle to produce more force forces the muscle cell to expand in size to accommodate those additional contractile proteins and the sarcoplasm that goes with it. Another myth is that you can train for sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is just a temporary side effect of an increase in intracellular fluid from metabolic stress. You cannot train for just an improvement in muscle size long term. Muscle size is always accommodated by an improvement in muscle strength. So basically, the purpose of exercise is to make your muscle stronger. All those other things come with it as a side effect. We have an improved cardiovascular system. If our muscles become stronger and they become bigger because we've added contractile elements, you're going to need more oxygen. You're going to need more substrate, more blood. You're going to have to remove more waste. Therefore, your cardiovascular system improves to accommodate that new strength. If our muscles become stronger and need to produce more force, you're going to need an improved metabolic system in order to contribute the substrate and the things it needs to produce that force. So the way I define exercise is just, it's strength training. Other things may have an exercise-like side effect because there's some level of muscular stress involved, but real exercise is a deliberate attempt to stimulate an improvement in muscular strength.
Do you think some of this stuff can get kind of semantics where, especially in the research that comes out, especially if you look closely, I think there was some new meta-analysis where it was like, well, I literally just read it this morning. It was on, someone just covered it recently too, whatever. It was basically, I was like, well, it was a subtle difference between going to absolute failure and going to, I know you're not a fan of the RIR stuff, but getting close to failure, like a couple reps kind of shy of that. Or if somebody, just the classical old school approach, which would be, I did this kind of when I had limited, like with COVID, I had a few machines and I notoriously would use the sliding bench trainer. I'm like, yeah, you can't, it's so light that I would just go, I had to do tons of repetitions and multiple sets to get to the point where I felt like I really couldn't. I wouldn't say it was failure, but I did enough work that was like, no, it wasn't excruciatingly grueling, but I did enough where I'm like, yeah, I can't do that again for a few days. Like my lats would be on certain exercise. We'll get into like why exercise and exercise efficiency is important too. But do you think some of that gets into semantics with some people?
Yeah, of course it does. The problem with meta-analyses is that meta-analyses include with them the problems with the individual studies. So when I looked at meta-analyses and you look at one that has a particular result, well, if you go and you look at the individual studies that are included, sometimes there are some really big issues in those individual studies.
Right.
So what a meta-analysis does is it takes the results of all those studies, but it doesn't look into exactly how the study was performed. That's why I'm not really a big fan of meta-analyses, because they are going to have along with them all of the mistakes that the studies may have. But in the long term, again, any level of stress is going to stimulate muscle growth in the beginning, of course. But what I've experienced is, in order to get your body to its actual maximum genetic potential, you've got to learn how to train as hard as you're capable of. People who go through my coaching program, they've been, doing high intensity training for a year or two, and I review their training. I have them film their videos and send them to me, and I do video reviews of their training. And once I teach them how to push past that level where they're stopping, past their comfort level, muscle growth happens almost instantaneously. I've had guys in their 50s gain 10 pounds in a month just by learning to take it to that next threshold. So the meta-analyses may say, within 12 weeks or however long they are. First of all, they're really not long enough, generally. Studies generally aren't long enough. It may say that there is similar muscle growth over whatever time frame, but I definitely think through my experience coaching people and through just intuition that you will not unlock your genetic potential unless you learn how to train with an extremely high level of effort, aka to failure.
And you probably get this too, where I used to sometimes say if someone says they're training to failure, I don't want to say it's a subjective thing because you can use, of course, like the momentary muscular failure as a barometer of that. But even that, psychologically, I think if someone gave you a rep range of like 20 to 30, your brain might just start shutting off. Like I can't do this one, Or if people go to the gym, they're listening to you the first, say, 15 minutes, and they're just like, okay, that's easy enough. I can go to the gym. I can do that. I'll get a rack and I'll just go till I can't do anymore. And then that's it. So how much of that plays a role, not just with machines, but also just psychologically getting to that point of what is objectively failure for that person?
Most people, unless they are taught how to take it to true muscle failure, are not doing it, because it takes me probably about 2 to 3 months to teach someone through practice and through time how to take the set to the optimal level of failure. So I'm under the impression, unless people have been taught, they're not doing it. But like I said, they are providing enough stress to stimulate a response.
Mm-hmm.
If you do anything hard with your muscles, you're going to stimulate an adaptive response to some degree. I guess what my point is, most people are not unlocking their full potential by learning how to really take it past that threshold of their level of comfort. A lot of the times too, there's a difference between exercise failure and momentary muscle failure. And then of course, there's probably psychological components. If you're doing a set that lasts 20 reps, boredom might come into play, but also lighter weights with longer sets tend to burn more.
Right.
And people may stop the set prematurely to optimal motor unit recruitment simply because it gets very uncomfortable. So I kind of like to adjust the rep range based on the individual, based on what they are able to push harder with. Some people actually do better with heavier weights. I like doing about a 6 to 8 rep range. Some people do better with 8 to 12 or 10 to 15, something like that. Because if you look at the research, anything between, I think it's 5 and 30 reps results in similar muscle growth. But that's theoretic. I find that there's a difference between theory and practical application. What I find in practical application is that with slightly heavier loads, people actually push harder than if they were to use light loads. So most people are training hard enough to stimulate a response, but I would say unless somebody was instructed by somebody who knew how to teach someone to train to real failure, they're leaving gains on the table for sure.
So what kind of equipment do you think in the home gym do you think people need to pick up if they want to do it on their own?
Yeah, I mean, I coach a lot of people who have just a very basic setup like you, just a power rack with safety bars. There's no such thing as a dangerous exercise for the most part. Exercises can just be performed dangerously without the proper safety measures in place. A bench press and a squat can be done perfectly safely. I coach a lot of people doing the squats, but you're just going to have to set it up in a particular way for if you end up reaching failure or getting into jam like that, you can safely terminate the exercise without hurting yourself. Personally, I use a combination of both free weights, machines, and body weight. So it's merely a tool, a machine, free weight, whatever. These are just tools to provide resistance against your muscles. When your muscles contract against resistance, you recruit motor units. If you take the muscle to a high level of intensity, you're going to recruit a lot of motor units and stimulate growth. Whichever tool you use really doesn't matter. I would say it's mostly preference for the most part. There's this belief that free weight exercises are somehow more dangerous than machine exercises. Well, the way people traditionally do them, they are. But I personally do free weight exercises, and all my clients do free weight exercises. There's never been an injury, not one time, if you do them correctly. But personally, I like to use everything. I like to use a variety of tools. I like to do things like even push-ups, dips, pull-ups. I like to use squats, leg presses, bench press, dumbbell press, regular hammer strength chest press. It really doesn't matter what you use. You need to simply apply the principles correctly. And once you're doing that, whatever tool you use to apply those principles becomes irrelevant.
Well, what's your thoughts on just like the machines? I think, high intensity training is notorious for like the Nautilus and using machines and stuff like that. Do you think that's just more of a, for lack of a better term, just kind of optimal situation if someone has access to machines, or you think just better stimulate the muscles for a given exercise or given body part?
No, I don't think the machines will stimulate muscles better. I think it will do it more
Safer.
efficiently.
Okay,
It's
efficiently.
more efficient. So Arthur Jones, when he was developing his machines is when he started to come across these principles. He noticed that, pushing harder and doing less volume created better results. But that was during the time he was creating machines, but he was creating machines more so for an efficiency standpoint and a safety standpoint. As the story goes, Arthur Jones got into creating machines just as a hobbyist. He was doing a set of barbell squats in his living room and he ended up falling through the floor. And he thought to himself, there's got to be a safer, better way to do this. That's what influenced him to start creating machines as a safety approach. But now 2025, we know that you can still use free weights and do them safely. I think machines are just much more efficient. You can go in there, select your weight, do your set, move on. Whereas if you're doing free weights, there's a lot of different adjustments and changes you need to make. It's less efficient, but I don't think there is a difference in results between the tools you use as long as you are properly adhering to the principles. And I've seen that in my coaching as well. I've got a guy who started off with me. He was 35 years old. He was 132 pounds, really skinny guy. He does nothing but time static contraction. And now he's 152 pounds. And he couldn't gain a pound to save his life throughout the entirety of his adulthood. And he gained 20 pounds and he hasn't lifted a single weight.
Wow.
He learned how to contract his muscle statically to the point where they can no longer produce force with time static contraction. And he uses nothing but a furniture lifting strap. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with Drew
Yeah.
Bay, but
Yeah.
Drew Bay got me into these, furniture lifting straps for time static contraction. And Andy, this individual, started using them and put on a ton of muscle and strength. So it really doesn't matter which tool you use. But also the difference, what I'm finding from practical application, people tend to get a little better results by going to the gym. But it's not because the machines are more effective. I think it's because subconsciously they train harder when they go to the gym. So all these things you need to keep into consideration. And I'm finding that, from practical application, a lot of people tend to get a little better results with something like a barbell squat because there's that self-preservation aspect to it. You've got, 225 pounds on your back. You don't want to drop it. So subconsciously, you actually push yourself harder and recruit more motor units. So there may be some practical differences between the two, but physiologically and in theory, there's not going to be any difference in your results between which tool you use.
Going back to that time static contractions, I know that's a big thing. People, especially on the channel, people ask a lot about that. Are you saying there's no difference? I mean, because people people ask these, why would I ask these questions? Because I know people are going to be thinking about these questions. So I might know your answer already. But why even buy equipment? Why don't I just do time static contraction? Are you telling me I can get all the same results that I can get with machines and free weights and not buy anything and just buy some lifting straps?
I'm telling you could in theory, but practically, probably not. So like if you were properly instructed, yes. But if you're training on your own, probably not. So we've got to take those other aspects into consideration. You look at studies, you look at physiology, all this stuff, and on the surface, it would appear that you could see the same results. But we're dealing with people. All right, people are emotional. There are psychological things that may prevent them from, training as well as they could with some of these other tools. So I take those things into consideration. But if you were an expert in time static contraction, yes, I do believe you could see the same results as if you used machines or free weight. But
just to play devil's advocate, sorry, go ahead.
But practically speaking, most of the time, probably not.
Okay. Well, yeah, you mentioned, I know Drew Bay, that's a big like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just, he's really focused in that area. He has a big, like, you could say he's probably an expert in that area.
Yeah.
He obviously has machines. If you watch any of his videos, you see a bunch of machines behind him. So again, the person at home might be like, well, why the hell does he need all the machines? Just do time static contractions. You know what I mean? Or is there something else missing?
Yeah, it's boring.
Okay.
Again, like we're people.
Yeah.
We're human beings. So when I'm finding an exercise, people get really obsessed with like the data and the physiology and the science and the research. But we need to remember we're dealing with people.
Yeah.
People seem to do better with equipment, with machines. Drew probably prefers machines. He knows that he could get good results with time static contraction, but he wants to use the machines. So there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah,
that's why I love you, because I think you're that answer is why I love like your responses. You're just very candid. You start out there, so that's what I love about it. I had a thought just popped right out of my head though. But yeah, go ahead.
We can't get so the one thing I've noticed over the last 10 years of instructing this is that we're dealing with people, and people are funny creatures, and there's a lot of variation between people. Like Andy loves time static contraction. It's his thing. He's going to do it forever. He has no desire to even use a machine. Me personally, I do time static contraction, but I would never only do time static contraction because I like lifting weights. We also need to, so if we're looking for an exercise approach that you're going to stick with forever, which people should be training till the day they die. I've had clients 84, 85 years old continue to train with me. You also have to find something that you relatively enjoy so you continue to do it. And if people are doing time static contraction, getting good results, but it doesn't feel, you don't feel as accomplished as when you lift weight, people are not going to be too excited to do it, thereby maybe not push themselves as hard, thereby not maintain the level of frequency that they probably need.
And I think I know your answer on this one too, but I'm sure you've come across some people that just the high intensity session itself can be like going to the dentist. It's like, this is going to suck. It's a double-edged sword because, like I said, when I was doing it, and maybe I'll go into the question too about like what advice you'd have for me, but I did it for a good period of time. I'd say at least I don't know. I'd say better part of last year and even early, maybe later 2023, I tried it too. But there got to a point where one, I practically needed like film stuff because I was filming equipment stuff. So I had to like more sessions, but I was just so destroyed for like 3 to 4 days. Day one, and always that night, I could not fall asleep. I'd be like, it would just mess up my sleep, going to bed. The next day, I'd be like, okay, day 3 or 4, like just like a truck hit me. It was just like energy was zapped out of me. And it was day 5, 6. I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to go. I'm itching. I probably went in a little too early than I should have, but I'd just be itching to go back in the gym. So psychologically, it's like part of me wants to do something. And it's, I guess, what do you say to that person that, I guess, maybe in my situation, just in general, recovery, and then also want to do more?
Well, there's a couple things you could do. It sounds to me like your volume was a little bit high.
Could
And
be, yeah.
because volume is relatively low, the way people interpret volume. Volume is actually properly defined as time under meaningful load. It's not sets, it's not reps. Not all volume is created equal. And I saw a meta-analysis by Thomas DeLure. He posted the other day on YouTube. He said this meta-analysis shows the optimal weekly volume for muscle groups for growth. And it's like, well, how do you know that? Because if I take 10 people and I tell them to do a set of 10 or 3 sets of 10 with curls and just say, hey, go do 3 sets of 10 with curls, pick whatever weight you want, whatever, we're going to see 10 different things. We're going to see one person not push very hard. We're going to see some people push kind of hard. We're going to see some people take themselves to hell and back. And that's all different volume. People who are pushing harder, they're not going to be able to tolerate as much volume. People who are not pushing as hard is going to be able to tolerate more volume. So the amount of volume that is optimal for the individual is based on the individual. I know everybody just tell me what to do. How many sets per muscle group, how many exercises, how many times a week. But we need to remember that your results are not the outcome of like a recipe. People look at a workout program like it's a recipe, like making an apple pie. Okay, I put this much sugar, I put this much whatever in this recipe, I bake it at this temperature for this amount of time, and boom, I have the apple pie. Perfect, like the recipe says. That's not what a workout program is. And what a lot of people do is they end up trying all these different recipes, hoping that they're going to get the best tasting apple pie, but it's not the recipe, because it has to vary between on individual tolerance, individual recovery ability, even their motor control, their ability to recruit motor units. Even exercises may depend on their particular anatomy. I've had some clients that cannot perform a squat. Their femurs are too long. If they perform a squat, they're going to tip forward. But for people who like to go to the gym more frequently, this may not be for them. If people enjoy, and that's what I like to say on my channel a lot, is if you're one of these people who love to go to the gym 5, 6, 7 days a week, don't do this. Just don't. But if you get to the point where you're like, wow, I haven't really seen, good results, but I like going to the gym all the time, well, you got to weigh out what's more important to you. Is enjoying exercise and going to the gym frequently more important than putting on, extra muscle mass? Well, then do that. If you get to the point where you don't care what you have to do, you just want to put on muscle mass, you should probably shift more towards the high intensity training side. So I would say it really depends on the individual. Or if people want to apply high intensity training protocols, you can do like a 3-way split, maybe even a 4-way split with just shorter, lower volume workouts.
Yeah, great stuff. How about you probably got this question a lot. People might not know this, but you can touch on your stance on cardio, which I pretty much agree with. The only thing I maybe add, I don't think you maybe not disagree with this at all. Maybe not. I don't know. The you're not necessarily saying like going out like walking your dog, going out for a walk around the block, whatever. It's like I've heard some people with high intensity like, well, it's recovery mode. Don't do anything. But I learned one thing, especially doing those workouts. Like I need to move my body, or just that soreness and stiffness just got compounded. So are you well, yeah, touch on cardio, but then I guess for somebody who says like, well, in the off days after I'm not doing my hit workouts, I got 5 days of the week. I don't want to sit and watch TV or just sit down. You probably encourage them to do something. Maybe, I don't know, go out for a walk or something. So what's your thoughts on that?
Do whatever you want, just don't lift weights. You know,
Okay, great.
like people have made weight training a recreational and social activity, and that's why they have a hard time with that. But you can do any physical activity you want as long as it's not lifting weights or doing wind sprints every single day. Because the thing is, like, you'll be able to tell if it's too much. If you do a physical activity and it is impeding or hurting your recovery, you're going to know right off the bat. You're going to feel like you were hit by a truck, like you did, and you're not going to want to do it. But if you have the energy, motivation, and excitement to do these other activities while you're training, then they're just fine. There is this weird belief in some of the more old school high intensity training coaches that any activity outside of the gym is going to worsen your recovery. That's just not true. You're not going to be generating enough physical stress or recruiting enough motor units in order to prevent proper recovery. And people, there are a lot of people under the impression too that, if they do one extra exercise out of the big 5 from Body by Science, that they're not going to grow muscle. And it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
What I recommend is people find recreational activities that don't involve the gym to use their body, such as, playing a sport. Down here in Florida, pickleball is very popular. Pickleball, basketball, play some golf, do anything you want. Just don't lift weights. And if it's that important to you to lift weights every day, then don't do high intensity training. Now, if you are a bodybuilder, especially a professional bodybuilder, and you must optimize your physique in order to make a living, well, you might need to split hairs like that a little bit. But most people are just normal people looking to put on muscle and improve their physical capacity. So they have no business worrying about all that other stuff, because especially like working the long head of your triceps or the short head of your biceps or this head, that head, blah, blah, blah. Nobody who's watching our videos is going to be stepping on stage having the long head of their triceps analyzed in order to win an award. Nobody.
Right. Yeah.
If they are, well, there might be some other things they need to do. So the fitness community kind of conflates bodybuilding with normal exercise. 99% of the people don't have the genetics to even be a bodybuilder, but they end up worrying about all these little, minutia details about bodybuilding that don't even apply to them.
Yeah, touch on that. That's always a very important thing that you really hit on, was the genetic limit and this idea. Because I hit on that the other day about consistency. Obviously you got to put in the work, but I think my point is that if you're at least somehow, I think your body naturally will recover, and you're going to want to do something extra, if you're being honest with yourself, that you'll hit your genetic limit at some point doing almost anything within reason. So maybe hit on that a little bit.
Yeah, for the most part, if you're training intensely, consistently, and you're not overtraining and you're recovering properly, every strength training, weightlifting approach is probably going to lead you very, very close to your genetic potential in the long run. High intensity training, however, will get you there with less time spent in the gym and less wear and tear on your joints. It's simply more efficient. Just like if I wanted to go to the grocery store, I can take my bicycle, I can walk backwards, or I can take my car. Either way, I'm getting to the grocery store. But I'm going to take my car because it's safer and more efficient. But that's also, I really did believe that for the longest time. Like, no matter what you do, you're going to reach your genetic limit within a certain amount of years. But I'm finding that it isn't entirely true, because a lot of people are training consistently, relatively intensely over time. And then I get a hold of them and I put 5 to 10 pounds of muscle on them.
So they're kind of holding back.
Yeah, they are. But if you have professional bodybuilding genetics, however, you're getting where you're going to be no matter what you do. They're so responsive to exercise. It doesn't matter what they do. But if you're the average Joe, I'm finding the average individual really does need to learn how to take a set all the way to hell and back in order to maximize their genetic potential. But this doesn't necessarily, I don't think, apply to a lot of bodybuilders, because they're going to grow muscle like magic no matter what they do. But professional bodybuilders, if they were doing more of a high intensity training approach, they would get there with less wear and tear, less injury, less time spent in the gym. But I don't think bodybuilders want to spend less time in the gym, which is why they don't care. They don't care about this.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Resistance band training is huge. I think taken to a level of high, like I think you did a video on it actually, because I think of the thumbnails in my brain, but like the X3 system, it basically, I think, was taking Mike Menser high intensity approaches and putting it in there. Like you're basically doing one set to failure with heavy bands and then making a case of why that is optimal or is possible or efficient for some people as a tool. What's your take on, because I think you had a feeling that resistance bands as a resistance training mode was inferior to other things we talked about.
Well, so here's the thing. Like I said, it doesn't matter the tool you use as long as you recruit a lot of motor units and stimulate them, aka train intensely. The problem I have with resistance bands is they provide a linear increasing resistance against a muscle torque curve, aka the amount of force your muscle can produce throughout the range of motion, that changes. So when my biceps are extended, the actin and myosin do not overlap as effectively, which is why my biceps don't produce a lot of force in this position. Somewhere in the middle of the range of motion, the actin and myosin overlap and cross bridge optimally, which is why the muscle torque, or the amount of force the muscle can produce, increases in this position. And then as I shorten the muscle belly and reduce the range of motion into the contracted phase, the actin and myosin start to overlap too much and start to bend, and it reduces the amount of cross bridging that the actin-myosin can make, reducing the amount of force the muscle can produce again. So the curve of muscle torque with, most exercises or most muscle groups is more of a bell shape. A resistance band is a linear progression. So you've got a bell shape muscle torque curve, the amount of force the muscle can produce through the range of motion, against a linear increasing resistance profile. You're just asking for a sticking point. So it's not that big of a deal, but I would find that a lot of times people are not going to be getting the optimal amount of resistance in the position of the range of motion they want it, aka somewhere in the middle, with the resistance profile like that. And that's why Nautilus was created. It had that weird shaped cam. It would reduce the moment arm between the chain and the axis of rotation on the cam, and then increase the moment arm on the axis of rotation in the cam in the strongest position, increasing the amount of resistance. So you'd get less resistance, the most, slightly less, based on the cam that Arthur Jones developed for the Nautilus machines, more adhering to the muscle torque curve of those movements. So really the only problem I have with resistance bands is that increasing resistance profile against a non-linear muscle torque curve. But I think they're still effective to some degree. But I'd reckon, people would probably see, I mean, who knows? I just don't know if people would see better results with a machine that accommodates the muscle torque curve versus one that doesn't, like a resistance band. Anything's going to be effective though, but I think intuitively people would probably see better results using exercises that accommodate that muscle torque curve.
Awesome. Now this is a topic too. I'd only bring this up because I know you brought it up before publicly, but I can always edit this out. I've touched on it. Like I have zero judgment whatsoever, but it's increasingly tempting. And people, I know. I think you said in one of your videos. I forget that you don't know anyone in your demographic or circle, whatever, that's not on some sort of TRT at a younger age. And just hear you talking about that, because I think some people, I don't look at it as a stigma. For me personally, it's just mentally I couldn't deal with having, like, if I'm traveling, I had to go, whatever stuff like that, and just the idea of having to be on some forever, just like I said, like a subscription based model on like a hormone, whatever. But I'm open to totally hearing. I'm just interested to hear your take on it, because I know you're not, I don't know if you're a promoter about it, whatever, but you have positive things to say about it. So is there something that you tell clients you're asked this question? Because definitely, I'm sure you're influential to those guys or girls, whatever.
Yeah, I would say, honestly, probably 25% to 50% of my clients are on TRT. And most of the time you wouldn't even know it, because I think people look at TRT as like a steroid cycle, but it's not. It's a very low dose of testosterone to take your testosterone to higher healthy ranges. And personally, I look at it as the ultimate life hack. I mean, you're not getting, super physiological levels of testosterone, which do help with muscle growth to some degree. But when you get into that super physiological aspect, you're getting a hell of a lot of side effects with it. Steroids are an awful idea for virtually everybody, because most people are going to have much more side effects than therapeutic effect, making them not worth it. A lot of the bodybuilders you see are the opposite of that. They have a huge amount of therapeutic effect and very little side effects. Again, your response to these things vary between individuals. But TRT, some people respond to it very, very well with, like, improvements in muscle growth and all that kind of stuff. But most people, you wouldn't even know that they were taking it. I think TRT shines with the energy improvement, the mood improvement, the mental clarity improvement, and just overall well-being and improvement in health. A good friend of mine, Dr. Chris Bronson, if anybody's listening to this, he's got a TikTok. I think it's just called Dr. Chris Bronson. And he talks about TRT and, all the myths behind it and everything. And so far as I can tell, I have not seen any, negative aspects of low dose TRT. But I think people might be under the impression that if they take TRT, they're getting on the juice and they're going to blow up. No, that's not going to happen. What it's going to do is it's going to make you feel better. It's going to give you, it's going to give you better energy, better mental clarity, better mood, more ambition, things like that. But from a physiological perspective, it doesn't seem to do much based on what I've seen. There's plenty of normal guys. Most of the people who are close to me who are taking TRT, you would never know. It's that minimal. So I think the stigma against TRT is it being like this ultimate physique enhancement thing is just plain wrong. But again,
I think it's good for people to know that too, because I think some people might jump into it purely for that reason.
They're going to be really, really disappointed. Yeah. And I tell people that all the time. Like, if you want to use TRT because you think it's going to, drastically change your physique, you're going to be extremely disappointed, because it's usually not.
Yeah. And then I can see them just tracing the dragon even deeper, because it's like, well, I got it.
But then at the other side too, if you have an individual who has a muscular physique and they're taking TRT, then they're going to attribute those results to that. So it's, it's constantly a losing battle, because there's so much controversy in exercise itself, that when people do not realize the physique that they are shooting for based on their training, they're generally going to be disappointed and make excuses why other physiques look the way they do, because they have not gotten there. But it's a waste of your time to do that, because it's usually mostly genetic. And it's something people just need to accept. The human body did not evolve to be very muscular, ripped, and look like a physique athlete. It did not evolve that way. The reason why we value these physiques and the reason why we want to look like that is because they're rare. Go to the mall, go to the airport, go take a walk where there are a lot of people. See how many muscular physiques you find. Maybe one. And I do it all the time. I look around. It's extremely, extremely rare, just like somebody being 6'8" is very rare. So unfortunately, I think people are under the impression that, someday they'll find the right supplement, they'll find the right workout program, they'll find the right protein powder, and then finally they're going to get this physique that they saw on Instagram. But it's just not true. What we should be focusing on is improving your individual health, your individual physique, in your individual circumstances as much as you can, and stop comparing yourself to everything you see online, because most of that shit's fake anyway, to be honest.
Yeah. Love it, brother. I want to respect your time. I started doing this a little bit. I think it's fun. I want to hear your answers. So these are just really stupid, cheesy questions. If you got a second. All right. Favorite movie?
My favorite movie. Oh boy.
You're Italian, so I'm predicting like Godfather.
Yeah, that's immediately what came to mind. I would say it's a tie between A Bronx Tale, Goodfellas, and Godfather Part 2.
Okay. Do you like Godfather 3?
No.
See, I like that one. Nobody likes it. I like
No, everyone hates it. And I think it's just part of my culture growing up. It's like you just accept that Godfather 3 was a huge mistake.
Let's see. Favorite food? And not something like you can actually get. So not like your mom's pasta primavera. Cheeseburger. Okay. Like where?
My favorite cheeseburger is probably from a place called Culver's. But my brother-in-law also owns 2 cheeseburger restaurants in Rhode Island called Chomp. If anybody's listening to this and lives in Rhode Island, that's going to be one of the best burgers you ever had. But I love cheeseburgers.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Favorite music?
To be honest, I don't really listen to music much. I listen to audiobooks, but if I had, my favorite band is probably Led Zeppelin.
Really? Okay. That's the one rock band I can never get into, ironically.
Really? I love them.
Yeah. Let's see. What's the last question? What's something you think people don't know about you, or like maybe, I don't know, strange quirk or something, hobby, something you think people wouldn't expect to know about Jay Vincent?
Well, believe it or not, I'm actually a really good dog trainer.
Really?
So one thing people probably don't know about me is another hobby of mine. I have a Belgian Malinois, and he's very highly trained. And I spent the last few years of my life really getting into dog training, and became pretty good at it. So another hobby of mine is I know a lot about dogs, and I'm pretty good at training them.
Awesome. Well, it kind of makes sense. I mean,
train people, train dogs. It's the same thing, really.
Exactly. Let's plug all your stuff. And again, I got to say, individual testimony. I bought his Golden Era system a while ago, was not sending me free or anything like that. I got 0 affiliates. So definitely check. I think you guys will love it. It's laid out perfectly. I think it answers all the questions anyone could possibly have, and it's addressed very succinctly and simply. And I think you updated it recently too. You're just constantly updating it for the same price. So
I'm starting to replace some of the original videos with longer, more in-depth, higher quality videos, because when I started it, I filmed it on my iPhone, and I'm going to be updating it over time with deeper explanations of the exercise with a high quality camera like I got here too. So I do that occasionally. I film an updated video and I just plug it in. If you have the Golden Era system, you just have to be mindful and just look through the videos and see if it's new. But yeah, I'm constantly updating, adding to it, and just making it better.
Yeah, awesome. I'll of course link that down below. And then you want to talk a little about the coaching and just obviously plug anything else.
Sure, yeah. So my coaching program, basically, it's a essentially lifetime access to me as your mentor, as your coach. And what I do is I teach you individually how to train correctly to muscle failure, how to adjust volume and frequency. I teach you the concepts of high intensity training and almost kind of make you an expert in this, so that way you can do this on your own perfectly for the rest of your life. That's my goal. My goal is to make everybody self-sufficient. So within about 3 or 4 months, I get people to the results that they're looking for with the level of knowledge that they need to continue this for the rest of their life. But I leave myself open to my clients in case questions arise down the road. That's why I make it a lifetime membership. Another reason I make my coaching unlimited is because people respond at different rates. You know, some people may respond a little slower, some people fast. So I found that if I do like a 4 month coaching program, some people may maximize their results, some people may not. So simply, I work with you until you get where you need to be and until you learn what you need to learn. In addition to that, we do 2 group calls every Saturday and Sunday for 3 hours, going over exercise stuff, going over the science, going over research, so I can equip all my clients with even more knowledge. And I basically just walk you through this in order to get you the best possible results your genetics will allow.
Awesome. Love it, brother. Awesome talking to you. Hopefully get you on again.
Yeah, man, of course. I'm sure there's a lot more questions you have, and I'd love to answer them.
Oh, yeah. I had tons of questions. I didn't get to any of them. So, all right. Thanks, Jay.
Pleasure. Thank you.